I'm with Greg Brady, the morning show host at Toronto today. We are at the Air India Flight 182 Memorial in Toronto to pay our respects to those whose lives were lost 40 years ago. Good evening, Red.
Yeah, it's an important night to be here, and one of the hottest nights of the year in Toronto. So seeing everybody here was important. They were patient, they listened. I think we all learned, and we remembered, and that's what we were here to do 40 years after the fact.
Have you been here before at this event, at the previous editions?
I haven't been at the previous editions, but it's something that has always been significant to me. I remember it I was just finishing elementary school when the news of the bombing happened, and we were just wrapping up probably like 2 or 3 days left in the school year, and it was all we talked about the next morning. It was all that was on the news for weeks and almost months afterwards. So I'm somewhat dismayed. I think that we don't do as much to recognize its place in history, in Canadian history, and in our relations as well between Canada and India. I think it's critical that we give it some emphasis for I'm not as young as I look, but for the younger generation to make note of it, for sure.
Definitely. So, why do you think it has taken Canada so long, or even now it hasn't recognized it entirely? Because this is the deadliest aviation disaster in Canadian history, and barring 9/11, this is also the worst terrorist attack. Why do you think it's Canada is still lagging behind in recognizing this or calling a spade a spade?
I think there's an element of embarrassment that in the initial investigations, they were slow moving, they were convoluted, they were botched, not for a lack of effort. And I think it's a little bit like when politicians or people in authority make a mistake, they'd almost rather move past it than admit that they made it. So we got a lot of things wrong with the investigation, a lot of things wrong in explaining why the investigation didn't go as it should have. And it's sort of a mark against us. Again, nothing to do with law enforcement, nothing to do with lawyers, nothing to do with politicians. But all that combined has just created an atmosphere 40 years later where I think we don't feel there's been justice done. And when there's not justice done, we tend to memorialize a little less the victims. You mentioned 9/11. Well, we haven't exactly treated it like our own 9/11 and asked all the big questions. Why? Who? How do we prevent it again? What's it mean to who we are as Canadians, whether you were born here or not? So moments like these are important, and I actually do think there's more emphasis and clarity to make it important again for us 40 years after.
Yeah. To be honest, out of the 329 lives lost, 268 were Canadian. That they were not entirely white. I don't know. Do you think that could have been an issue that kept the Canadian governments from...
Yeah, I wonder about it back then, whether that would have factored in or not. It sure didn't in terms of the news coverage. It was a massive story every night. I mean, I'm a little kid then, 12, 13 years old, and I'm watching the news every night with my parents, and we're just mortified that it had happened and that somebody could commit. Bad things are going to happen in the world, and bad people are going to do evil things, but we never fathomed a tragedy to that scope. So I don't know that it's so much about race or religion or background as it simply was at that point in time. The resources were so, how would I put it, they were just not procured the right way, and we didn't have enough belief that we could get this done and get the investigation done and make clear that this has to be a critical part of recognizing our history. We're going to recognize the good almost always. We need to recognize the bad, and this was a sad and horrific day for every Canadian in 1985.
Yes. Final question, Greg. How can we change that? How can we make sure that the next generation or the current generation of Canadians know their history? Like we spoke a little while ago about only 1 out of every 10 Canadian under the age of 35 even knowing about this terror attack, right? What can Canada do differently so that going forward at least people are more aware of this?
Yeah, I mean, school, it starts in school to me. It starts at moments like this where someone would say, it was great to see younger people here. It was great to see, people who are 14, 15. It was great to see people who are 25, 26. People born well after this happened in 1985. So I think the schools have a responsibility, but I also think our governments have a responsibility as well. Should this be a national day of mourning because of the tragedy? I'd argue yes. And again, I think sometimes we need to put politics aside. We're not always going to agree on everything. We're not always going to see the country going, some people say, let's go this path, let's go that path, which should be pretty universal amongst Canadians. And again, Canadians that have been here generations, Canadians that have been here and arrived on our land in the last 40 years. We have to recognize this. There's no other country we would go to, Japan, Italy, India, Pakistan, and we would say, let's not recognize why this means so much to the country we're in now. And I think there's more an appetite for that than there used to be.
Okay, thank you. One more question, if you're comfortable taking it.
Yeah.
So of all the dignitaries who were invited to speak, one of them from Calgary did use the Khalistan word. He did say we should stand up to. He used Hezbollah and Khalistan in the same sentence. Do you have views on that? Is that something that we'd like to say, or?
Well, I think the reference is simply to terrorist factions, which there would be in almost every bit of fundamentalism. Has obviously extremists that will go beyond the law, that will say things that shouldn't be said, do things that shouldn't be done, and they'll challenge, in essence, how society, especially in a democracy, is built. So the reference to me is more, again, I just ended up running for office, knocking on doors of Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, all over the place. And the bottom line is that I think people are people at the end of the day. So I think they're important conversations to have, to recognize this. And I will tell you a quick story. I lived in Michigan during 9/11, and in the immediate aftermath of it, there were a lot of things done, and I thought to myself, that's not quite right, where we're judging people as to, well, how would they have felt on 9/11? Who would they have supported? Are they justifying it? Are they explaining it? Are they justifying it? So I think we've got to treat each other like brothers and sisters, and also be able to call out our own extremism in our own communities. And if that's a start, if there's a method to doing that, I think we'll all end up being in a better place.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure speaking to you.